if you are able to walk away from the deal when everybody else wants to do the deal, then you save yourself a lot of money and you save a lot of embarrassment and you save your money for firepower for a company that does deserve it.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
How do VCs have the expertise to judge? So I literally wrote a WhatsApp message and I said, I don't have an edge in understanding whether this works for the Philippines market. Now, I might have an edge compared to an American VC, but I don't have an edge compared to a Filipino VC, whether this works for the Philippines consumer market. So I think it's kind of like poker, but there's a certain amount of information that you know, and you have to be self-aware about what's the information that you don't know, and then your job is to find out what it is. So if you have a gap, I think you have to acknowledge what you don't know. You need to calculate your risk, and then you need to find that information. So for example, I do believe that compared to American, I'm a better judge of Singaporean founders. Even if you're Singaporean based in Silicon Valley, I don't think you can judge Singaporean startups on average as well as I am, because I'm here, I'm meeting them for coffee, I'm going for walks. I've seen them grow up over the past 5 years, 10 years. Like I know their history. I remember I did a reference call on the founder, and then this person was like, yeah, this person's good, blah, blah, but in secondary school, this person dumped his girlfriend really bad. And I was like, okay, I mean, totally irrelevant from a due diligence perspective. But that's the kind of information I have, right? It's like in my head, I was like, now I'm meeting the founder, I'm like, oh man, you dumped your girlfriend real bad in secondary school. But that's the kind of due diligence you have to do, right? And I think that's what happens. You see in South Asia, for example, you see a lot of fraud that's happening. And so a lot of American and international VCs perform badly because they were not able to catch that fraud because they were not aware of the market practice of that. So what they have done, for example, is they started hiring specialists, right? So for example, Vertex Ventures was hiring a fraud specialist, so a fraud analyst. So basically saying like, your job, JD, is like, we want you to review our portfolio and every other company out there that comes in a deal-wise, and we want you to check for fraud. So there's a form of, they're saying like, we don't have enough expertise to detect fraud unless you have a full-time person looking for it. The other side could be like, we don't understand healthcare, so we're going to look for a healthcare expert or PhD to give me a point of view. And so it's very quite common that you see a company, you like it, as you kind of do more work, you do due diligence, you're trying to vetting the deal, and then that's when you bring in those experts to have a perspective. So and there's all kinds, like I said, there's fraud, there's country risk, there's industry risk, there's founder risk. So there's all kinds of risks. And so you will normally bring in people to come in. But I can tell you that the reason why also VC, and somebody was asking about whether this is a sucker's game, as a small blind, big blind, like do people just earn management money for free? But the thing is, if you have an edge over other people in the private markets, you are not obliged to share that information with the world. If the guy is conducting fraud, he's not going to tell the whole world about it, right? And so if you are able to walk away from the deal when everybody else wants to do the deal, then you save yourself a lot of money and you save a lot of embarrassment and you save your money for firepower for a company that does deserve it, right? And so one thing we have to remember that when it comes to fraud, for example, is that by virtue of the power law, which is people are selecting for the best companies, and by virtue that fraud increases performance, by definition, the best companies in the world at a startup level that are private assets that are not properly vetted, by definition, there's an overrepresentation of fraud than in the general population because it's hard to vet until they go public, so on and so forth. So we saw that for Theranos, we saw that for FTX, we saw that for Zilingo. Currently, there are other companies that are currently struggling right now. I wouldn't call it fraud. There are other companies that are having missteps. So for example, you see OpenSC, which is the NFT marketplace, used to be a $1 billion company. Now they have a giant haircut on the valuation. So you can imagine 3 years ago, NFTs was the hype, right? So everybody's whatever. Then can you imagine you have to call an expert and you're like, hey, are you an expert in NFTs? And everyone's like, no, like NFTs only emerged 1 year ago. All the experts on NFTs were like, people, right? Because nobody was an expert in NFTs. So I think experts is one side of it, but I think a lot of people have to do something called like first principles thinking. It's like, can I see past the hype? And it's very, very hard to do because when everybody's jumping on, I think we all remember when crypto was like a no-brainer. And then now everybody's like, oh, I was never a fan of crypto. But even so, people still have made money in crypto today. If you put your money in the right projects and the right things, from a values investor perspective, you make money. I remember this guy, he was like, yeah, I make money on the suckers, right? So he's a trader. He went in, went out. So he was trading on the waves, right? The question is, yes, VCs will bring in specialists, or they have to do first principles thinking, and they have to do a lot of work because they're at the frontier of invention. And so there are some specialists, but the specialists can only bring you so far because you're at the frontier of knowledge. The startups that are crazy today would be, for example, there's a startup that's kind of saying like AI women are women. So that's their slogan. So that they believe that in the future, all men will primarily date AI women instead of real women. So it's a crazy thing, causing a lot of fights and everything. And then it's kind of depressing when you think about it. But have you met a teenager, right? There's a bunch of startups there. Friend.com will send you the video. They're basically saying like, hey, nobody wants to be lonely. We're going to make AI your best friend. So we're disrupting friends. There's a crazy idea. It's a necklace that you walk around, but the guy walks around with a necklace and then he talks to his best friend. For friend.com, he paid like about millions of dollars for the domain name. But I mean, his perspective is that people don't want to be lonely, right? But the thing is this, there are VCs that have invested in this startup betting that this company can create an AI companion and that in the future, 100 million people will wear an AI necklace around their neck and that'll be their best friend. Well, hello, are you going to continue using BlackBerry? Like, are you going to use BBM for your BlackBerry text messages? Have you heard of WhatsApp? You know what I mean? Stop hanging out with loser people who are slow and don't turn up on time. And when you ask them and complain about problems, they're like, oh, let me talk about my problems instead. Boo! I want somebody who's totally supportive of me. You know what I mean? Like, why is my spouse angry at me? Blah, blah, blah. You can complain about it to your AI friend, and your AI friend will be 100% supportive of you all the time. Sounds amazing, right? For only $10 a month. Oh, wow. That's what his pitch is saying, right? I mean, so friend.com, his belief is that everyone's going to wear a necklace with an AI companion. Right? Because, my 2-year-old is already saying, hey, Google, ABC, right? Pay wheels on a bus. Maybe that'll be normal for Generation Alpha. Maybe it's too early for his time. Maybe this will happen in 20 years or 30 years. So he may be wrong, but generally he is right. So there's a bunch of risks. It's like, is he too early? Is this ever going to happen? That's the first risk, right? Technology risk. Then 2 is this the form factor, a necklace that is going to happen? We don't know, right? And that's what he believes. And then thirdly, is he the right founder to do it? We don't know, but he's trying his best. He's on New York Times and other articles. He's out promoting his thing. What I'm just trying to say here is, yes, it sounds really sad. And I'm pretty sure everybody called them losers for a while. Like, I walk in with an AI necklace, I'm sure everyone's going to be like, loser. And then my AI necklace will be like, oh, Jeremy, you're a winner, by having me. Thank you for keeping me alive, Fuck these guys. They don't understand. They're old, elderly, geriatric. They're using Nokia phones. But you have me, friend.com. I mean, think about Star Wars. R2-D2, C-3PO, great, right? BB-8, the new cute version. In every movie that we watch, a sci-fi movie, the robot is a nice companion. If they're not murdering you, or sometimes they're your friend and they try to murder you, or they murder you and then actually they're kind of friendly. But, there's some different versions. But actually, culturally, we're quite ready for the concept of AI robotic companions. I mean, people are sad and lonely, and many times in general. I mean, it's just human biology, right? Like, which person around us, I mean, I can say like, yeah, I've been sad before. Like, it's not going to be a massive revelation, right? And then, it's like, you feel hungry at 1 a.m. and you're like, you know what, fuck it, I want McDonald's. I hit a button and McDonald's turns up, right? In 30 minutes. And then instead of me going to sleep like a normal person and not eating 500 calories, but now I can get a double McSpicy, right? Yeah, at 1 a.m. the guy kind of says, here's your double McSpicy and your French fries. And then I get it, I eat it, I'm gratified, right? So now if I'm lonely at 1 a.m. and my wife is asleep, or whatever it is, I'll be like, hey, I feel sad, I feel lonely, right? And so there's definitely something called, I call it lonely tech, but on-demand companionship, on-demand socialization, right? I mean, that's why you have an escort industry that's out there. There's a companionship industry that's out there. There's a therapist and executive coach industry out there. But all of this is a monetization and professionalization of a relationship. You don't have an uncle to give you good advice, so you get an executive coach, right? So there's that, you can call it structural or transaction or commoditization, depending on how you look at it. But definitely you see that happening for relationships. You see that for childcare, for example. Historically, childcare was done by parents, by your siblings, in a large group, in your kampong or whatever it is. And now that relationship is now commercial, right? You pay for a nanny or for a childcare worker. So those relationships have become transactions in that sense. Now they're good and so forth, but you understand it's not the same, right? So what's to say that you being lonely, your best friend or whatever it is, why does it say that it could not also become more professionalized as a result, right? And so, I think the Japanese have already created this. They're like the early adopters. So they call this, I think, rokoshe, but it means industries that prey on weak people. So, in Japan, obviously they have a big culture, for example, of like these parasocial personalities, right? So like your live streamers, your mukbangs, eating a lot of food and live streams, your Twitch streamers. These are also not real relationships, right? They are not your real friends. They're on Twitch, you're on your phone, you're eating, and you're watching somebody on YouTube explain their fantastic eating recipe, and you're like, wow, this guy is so great and amazing. But this person has no relationship with you. So this person does not know who you are. So it's a parasocial relationship. You have a social relationship with a representation of a person. I feel like I know my favorite history blogger or my Twitch streamer or so forth, but he doesn't know me. So it's not a real social relationship. So AI is a more ethical version of it, maybe. Like, you're talking to AI, but at least you're not believing that this human person believes in you. You know what I mean? So I think there's an interesting piece where technologies that we think are ridiculous today, I suspect personally, I think that AI companions will become very, very common in the future. I think for our generation, we like organic, natural, sugar-free, wild, weird humans to have that conversation with. But I can suspect that, hey, you're an angsty teenager, we're not going to go into the whole thing about the biological, social implications of the depression and its role in a society that has its institutions being deteriorated into a capitalist morass. All the facts start coming out here. But I think the crux of it that we're just saying here is, yes, I had a wonderful experience as an intern for Professor Howard Gardner. He created a concept of multiple intelligences. He said there's not just IQ, there's EQ, there's spatial intelligence, there's verbal intelligence. Great guy. And then he created called the Good Citizen Project, which is that he felt that society is becoming more nuclear. There's less extended family, so you don't have uncles, you don't have cousins. So you tend to be in schools where you're with people who are of the same age, right? And then your relationships are either flat or vertical with your teacher. You don't have a lot of diagonals. If you have a retreat of spiritual organizations from his perspective, whether it's a temple, a mosque, or church, there's a retreat of all the figures, extended family, and so forth. So his conversation was, how should the state step up to provide civic education that was historically provided by parents and extended family or whatever it is, right? So anyway, the crux of what I'm trying to say here is that technology both solves a need, but also creates that need, right? If that makes sense. So it's kind of like, you look at Star Wars, you're like, yeah, I mean, there are robots everywhere, right? And they're all friendly, some are enemies or whatever it is, but they're all over the place. In fact, I think what's most unrealistic is that humans are doing most of the decision making in Star Wars. Because I'm like, C-3PO is like this supercomputer, and C-3PO is like, wow, I'm so nice to you. I'm like, why? So, but I think let's not digress too much in that. But I'm just saying, like, we just have to be aware that things that are crazy can become the norm very, very quickly. Someone was asking me recently whether it's competition. So normally VCs do, if you look at this curve, basically this is a time graph, and it shows as the startup grows from left to right. And then on the y-axis is the revenue, the amount of revenue that you're making. So this is not amount of the net burn, but it's the amount of revenue you're making. And generally it's understood that at the start of this process, you're not making any money, you're figuring out the idea, you have to pay yourself or to get this technology up. And then you need to, you're making negative money. And then after that, as you kind of like get there, you start making more and more money, right? So the company I saw today was making about $1.5 million off capital, but they were not near break even. So it's still in the valley of death in that sense. But as you see, as they get larger and larger, you see ChatGPT, OpenAI now is making $1 billion of revenue. So but they're not yet an IPO public company. They're still a late stage company, right? And they are trying to get strategic alliances. They've got a strategic alliance with Microsoft, with Azure, because Azure was basically saying, no way in hell I want you to use AWS, Amazon server credits. I want to pine you to Microsoft system. I'm going to give you money in the form of Azure credits, Microsoft cloud credits. But also eventually they use that to embed into PCs, right? So Microsoft embedded ChatGPT into all the PCs, right? In the Cortana, etc. And then now Apple has a new strategic alliance with ChatGPT. And now they're currently evaluating, the rumor mill is that Apple is thinking about making another $1 billion investment into OpenAI, right? So this is a late stage. So you see here, there's the valley of death, there's C capital, angels, friends, family, fools. Because you have to be, very loving of this person to invest at this very risky stage. or seed capital will be a professionalized version. Then you have early stage capital, then your VCs, your late stage VCs, and so forth. Is the first rounds, maybe like pre-seed, Series A, Series B, Series C. So for example, when Ant Financial, which was founded by Jack Ma, it was trying to be in many ways, a new bank competing with the Chinese banking system, right? And then right before the IPO, Jack Ma shared some helpful feedback for the Chinese banking system. And as we know, what happened after that was that the IPO was pulled due to their requirement to new important Chinese banking laws they were clearly not aware of for national security reasons exactly. And at that point, our Singapore sovereign wealth funds had invested in this company at this stage as well, because we all thought IPO was going to happen. And then now they're finally, years after regulatory restructuring and relearning a lot of stuff, they have now been able to IPO, but at a much lower price because the regulators decided that they should be split out, or there are certain regulations on different business units, right? So I think one thing you can imagine is that financial started out low, everybody thought it was going to be an IPO, and then it dropped off, right? But what I'm trying to say here is that VCs will tend to collaborate across stages, right? So for example, if you were an early investor in a company, like a company called Rippling, there's like HR software, you did an early stage investment. Rippling is a company, his first company was called Zenefits, which you may have heard is a benefits platform, Zenefits. The guy left, it was legal, there's a dispute, all that went public recently. But I remember that when I was in Silicon Valley at the time, he was under a lot of fire from the media, so he had to resign from his first company, Zenefits. And then I remember that I heard that Y Combinator had funded his second company, and he was working at Y Combinator, but there was no media. Everyone was told, do not tell the media that he's being funded a second time by Y Combinator, right? And now Zenefits is dead effectively, but Rippling, which is the better V2 revenge version of his company, outcompeted now $1 billion company, not yet IPO. So YC is this early stage, but these late stage capital guys were happy to come in that capital. Does it make sense? So they normally collaborate across stages. And so they can say that every unicorn might be about 3 to 5 different VCs get a lot of returns in general, I would say. And then obviously within the rounds, there's some collaboration. So, there are syndicates or coalitions that will form that are friendlier with each other. But in general, VCs will compete very fiercely within this stage because there's only one funding round at this point in time. So when the times were good, when interest rates were very low, everybody who was doing these late stage funds thought that a lot of private equity funds, public equity funds felt like they could go to this stage. And so everybody was fighting in each other's lane because interest rates were very low. So everybody looked like a genius at that point in time. But now that interest rates are high, everybody's scared, everybody's becoming more specialized. Like what Sharia is saying, people are saying, actually, as an American, I don't understand Southeast Asia. So as somebody who's based in New York, it's easier for me to analyze this company when this company is a Series C company that has audited financials, a good board of directors. There's no more fraud left because everything's been due diligence by everything. And they are now expanding across multiple countries. I am more comfortable investing in a Series C company from New York, for example. I'm happy to let the seed deals that those VCs have to catch the fraud, etc. I'm happy to let the Southeast Asians do that deal because they are more in touch with that type of company, for example. So I think maybe we hear a lot of words like pre-seed, Series A, Series B, Series C+. So you may hear those words and you open that up. Now, this lingo, I'm just kind of give you a sense of it, but these lingo can be different and it can be mislabeled or whatever it is. But so I'm just giving you a sense of what the common understanding is. The amount raised is about $0.1 to $1 million, right? The people who are putting money in normally be friends and family. It could be an accelerator like Antler. It could be a university. It could be a government grant. But these tend to be like helping you at early stage to about $1 million of capital. And normally what happens is that right now at this point of time, you are working towards a minimum viable product or you barely have a minimum viable product. You might have a prototype. You may have a beta customers. But in general, you're making no money, most likely to making maybe $100,000 tops, right? So this is roughly the stage where people raise about up to $1 million. Now, you're normally raising about $1 to $3 million. This is probably your angels that you see, as well as your seed VCs. So these would be more professional in that sense. Angels are basically high net worth individuals or accredited investors in general. So normally the kind of traction that you have is you already have early adopters. You can see the conversion rate. You understand what's going on. Maybe about $100,000 to about $1 million of revenue a year. Then for your Series A, again in Southeast Asia, probably you're raising about $3 to $7 million. So Monk Hill Ventures would be an institutional VC that has raised several $100 million from LPs and institutions. And so these companies are expected to have already demonstrated product market fit. They're expected to have understanding of the expansion, they should be growing about 2 to 3x year on year, and they should have around about $1 million of annual recurring revenue. And then Series B is about 7 to 20 million, so let's say about $10 million check. You'll be getting institutional VCs, and then again, we're underwriting geographic and product expansion. They should have a great management team. On average, about $5 million of annual revenue, and they should be growing at least 2 to 3x year on year. And then Series C is about 20 mil. This will be a growth VCs and private equity. They should already be seen as a market leader in some of the geographies. There should be rapid expansion. They should be able to increase the margins, profitability over time. And then normally around at least $15 million of annual recurring revenue. And the growth rate will slow down a little bit more. So maybe about 2x would be a good target for it. So again, this is probably a little bit more indexed to Southeast Asia. I would say that if you look at America, like, if you raise $1 million seed, people will look at you like, wow, you're such a loser. Like, there's more capital in Silicon Valley, for example. Whereas if you go, for example, to Africa, then these numbers may be even smaller amount of capital raised. So I think the definitions do change over time. So for example, the word pre-seed didn't exist 10 years ago. Now pre-seed is the new seed because again, these definitions change over time. So that's how we think about it. Even in today's age, I think now the VC market is pretty dead and startups fundings are very slow. And right now, I think some people will argue that there's still an oversupply of capital because from their perspective is that everybody, first of all, if you're an American LP, you wanted to invest in China and you made a shitload of money in China, but you're no longer allowed to invest in China. You don't want to invest in Europe because Europe. And then you get what I mean? So where are you going to go? So Southeast Asia, perhaps, right? And then if you incorporate American capital, where are you going to put it in? You're going to put it in Singapore, which is Delaware, right? So there's a lot of people that, and then also you have the Chinese capital, flow of capital, founders, tech founders, or exited founders, or fund managers, or family offices that come in Singapore, and they're also there. So there's actually a lot of oversupply of capital in that sense in the Singapore market. So I think some people may argue that Singaporean founders are subsidized by the savings of other people around the world because they get a ton of capital. Like if you come out and you have an idea, if you're Singaporean, you tend to get more capital. I think people also make the argument for Indonesia as well, because Indonesia is a 300 million. So people don't really look at Southeast Asia and say, I want to invest in Singapore. They're just saying, I had to set up my fund in Singapore, but they set up shop in Singapore to invest in Indonesia, right? Because they say 300 million people, growing, Prabowo has promised 7, 8%, blah, blah, blah. So there's a certain piece, people say, I want to be in Singapore, but I want to invest in Vietnam because, China plus one, manufacturing, they say they're promising 8 to 9% year-on-year growth, things like that, right? But they're only about 100 million people, right? So I think there's some debates about that, but I think many people will argue that there's an oversupply of venture capital for these markets. Whether it's true or not, it's hard to tell, but I think it is true that when we look at today's age, how many Southeast Asian IPOs have we seen in the past 2 years? I mean, like zero, effectively, right? Whereas in America, you still see IPOs are happening already, they've come back on the market, etc. So over the past 3 years, there was one unicorn that made it. So let's say there's one company that made it, right? You take your pick of Grab, Gojek, Shopee. Let's look 5-year period, right? Over 5 years, let's just say Grab, Gojek, and Bukalapak were your 3 pub unicorn over the past 5 years. So there's about one unicorn every 2 years, you know what I mean? So let's do some basic intuitive math, right? So there's one unicorn, and normally each unicorn will have about 5 stages funding before they become a unicorn on average, right? So that means only 5 funds could have made a home run investment. Does that make sense? So over 2 years, there's only one unicorn in that time frame. So that means over 2 years, only 5 VC funds could have made that investment. Does it make sense? So in other words, in Southeast Asia, if you go back in time, 10 years ago when they made those investments, only 5 VC funds deserve to be around today that have gotten at least one home run in their portfolio. And you may even argue it's half of that, right? Maybe 2.5 because it's 5 funds over 2 years, right? So it's like, but anyway, sorry, I think it's closer to, you know what, I'll say it's fair because a VC fund is supposed to deploy capital across 2 years, the first 2 years of their life. So yeah, so I'll say about only 5 VC funds have actually achieved any home run in their portfolio in Southeast Asia. There are way more than 5 VC funds today in Southeast Asia, right? I think there's at least 100 plus. But that being said, we don't know. Hope springs eternal. Maybe in 10 years' time, there will be 10 IPOs happening every year from Southeast Asia, right? So the 100 VC funds today would say like, you know what? We believe that in 10 years' time, there'll be 5 IPOs every year. We're all going to make money, right? You get what I mean? So I think there's that little bit of a debate. Whether you say there's oversupply capital or not, And of course, even if there's an oversupply of capital, maybe as a VC, you might say like, you know what, I think I'm lucky, I think I'm good, I think I'm smart, I'm smarter than everybody else. You know, I can beat the odds, right? Marina Bay Sands is like, you know, I think I'm better than everybody else at blackjack or poker, right? You know, the hope springs eternal. Maybe one more thing to say is, I think from a returns profile, where you're trying to achieve 25% net IRR, which requires you to have one home run out of every 20 investments, I think there's an oversupply of capital versus that goal. But I think from a governmental perspective, VC capital is a form of foreign direct investment. Every American's pension fund that goes into a Singaporean fund that gets deployed in Indonesia, for example, creates jobs for a Singaporean lawyer, a Singaporean accountant, a Singaporean fund manager or VC, an Indonesian entrepreneur, your early executive team. There's technology transfer that's happening as they become more productive. So from a government perspective, actually, you'll probably look at it as an undersupply of it. And so you look at the Philippines saying, we are structurally bad at absorbing venture capital. Venture capital doesn't want to come to the Philippines because of some of our accounting laws. We should try to reform it. I mean, they haven't agreed on it yet, obviously, but there are some things that make it structurally difficult for a VC to invest in the Philippines. So I think when you say it's undersupply, oversupply to some extent, it also depends on whose perspective. Obviously, as a founder, there should be as much oversupply of capital, right? I want as much capital to come in, no matter how young or inexperienced I am. The more capital I get pound for pound, the better, right? So I think it depends on how you define it, yeah? From a society perspective, when Uber and Grab and Gojek are competing each other and we had so many free vouchers and how cheap Grabs and Gojeks were, it was amazing, you know? The net transfer of American pension to coupons, right? Everybody enjoyed a cheap ride. Everybody got an iPhone or Android phone. It literally jump-started Philippines telco 3G networks and GPS, right? Because all that capital in, right? So it depends on the definition of oversupply and undersupply, yeah. Was an anchor LP is somebody normally will do at least 10% of your fund. If you happen to go clubbing in the past, you go to Zouk or any other nightclub, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., nobody's dancing because everybody's whatever. But you know that at some point, everybody's going to start dancing by 11 p.m. So you need that one weirdo to start dancing, right? At 7 p.m., he's just dancing by himself. After that, two people are like, fuck it, let's join them. And then suddenly everybody joins in and there's a lot of action happening, right? So normally VC funds make sure they have an anchor LP, that first person that puts in 10% to get the thing started. The anchor LP gets some preferential terms as a result. They're normally part of the LPAC, the LP Advisory Committee, the board of directors equivalent for the fund. They may have some other preferential information rights, things like that. So that's what they call an anchor LP.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.